The stagecoach rattled into Silver Gulch with the setting sun, casting long shadows across the single dusty street that comprised the town's beating heart. Victoria Hart clutched her small carpet bag tightly, her heart hammering against her ribs, as the coach finally groaned to a halt. 6 days of hard travel hadn't dulled the edge of her fear. Every unfamiliar face, every question about her past or her business made her palms sweat and her mouth go dry. Silver Gulch, end of the line, folks, the driver called, jumping down to open the door. Victoria waited for the other passengers to disembark before stepping carefully onto the wooden platform, her simple blue traveling dress dusty from the journey. The town was smaller than she'd expected, a cluster of weathered buildings clinging to existence in the vast emptiness of the Wyoming territory. Perfect for disappearing, perfect for becoming someone else. Miss Davis, a gray-haired woman, approached, her face lined with years of sun and worry. Margaret Davis, I'm Mrs. Holloway. We exchanged letters about the position. Victoria nodded, forcing a smile. That's me. Thank you for meeting me. The name still felt foreign on her tongue, borrowed like the papers in her bag that identified her as Margaret Davis, recently of St. Louis with impeccable references as a nurse's aide during the war. Mrs. Holloway surveyed her with shrewd eyes. You're younger than I expected. Sheriff Montgomery needs someone with experience, someone steady. I assure you, I've cared for many wounded men, Victoria replied, the half-truth bitter on her tongue. She had indeed tended wounded soldiers, but as a laundress who'd been pressed into service when the hospitals overflowed. Not as the trained nurse her forged references claimed. Well, we're desperate enough, I suppose. Mrs. Holloway sighed. Doctor's been trying to tend him while running the whole county, and that's just not sustainable. Man needs someone full-time, especially with his condition. Victoria had been told only that Sheriff Montgomery had been injured in the line of duty and required daily assistance. The specifics of his condition hadn't been mentioned in their correspondence. His condition? She prompted as they walked toward a small buggy waiting at the edge of town. Mrs. Holloway's mouth tightened. He was shot 3 months ago tracking a gang of bank robbers. Bullet took his sight. Doctors say it might be temporary, might be permanent. Either way, he's as ornery as a wounded bear about it. Victoria felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cooling evening air. A blind sheriff. The irony might have made her laugh if the stakes weren't so high. She was running from a false accusation of theft, her face on wanted posters throughout Colorado territory, and now she would be living under the same roof as a lawman, blind or not. I understand challenging patience, she said carefully. Many soldiers struggled with their new limitations. Ethan Montgomery isn't just any patient, Mrs. Holloway replied, helping Victoria into the buggy. He's the backbone of this town. Kept us safe through Indian raids, mining disputes, and the worst elements that drift through these parts. Seeing him brought low like this, she shook her head, grief momentarily softening her weathered features. Just do what you can for him, Miss Davis. That's all any of us can ask. The sheriff's house sat at the edge of town, a modest 2-story structure, with a wide porch and neat fencing. In the fading light, Victoria could see curtains drawn over every window, shutting out the world, or perhaps keeping the darkness inside. He's likely in his study, Mrs. Holloway said as she led Victoria up the steps. Been spending most days there since he came home from the doctor's. Says he's learning the room by heart. Won't let anyone rearrange a blessed thing. She knocked firmly on the front door, then used a key from her pocket to unlock it. Sheriff, it's Agnes Holloway. I brought your new aide, Miss Davis from St. Louis. A silence greeted them as they stepped into the dim foyer. Victoria's eyes adjusted slowly to the low light. The house was well appointed, but spare no clutter, no unnecessary furnishings. A lawman's practicality evident in every clean line. Sheriff Montgomery, Mrs. Holloway called again, moving toward a door to the right. Ethan. I heard you the first time, Agnes, came a deep voice from the shadow doorway. Don't need to shout. My eyes don't work, but my ears are just fine. Victoria's breath caught as Sheriff Ethan Montgomery stepped into the hallway. He was taller than she'd expected, broad-shouldered. Despite the weight he'd clearly lost during his convalescence. His dark hair was overlong, as was the beard that covered his jaw. But it was his eyes that held her unfocused, blue eyes that stared slightly past her left shoulder, clouded by whatever damage the bullet had wrought. Sheriff, this is Margaret Davis, Mrs. Holloway said, her tone softening as one might use with a skittish horse. She's come all the way from St. Louis to help you. Excellent references from her time nursing during the war. The sheriff's head tilted slightly, as if listening to more than just their words. Miss Davis, he said, his voice neither welcoming nor hostile. You've had a long journey. Yes, sir, Victoria replied, finding her voice. 6 days by train and coach. And you've come to Silver Gulch specifically to watch over a broken-down lawman. Skepticism edged his words. Must not be much call for nurses in St. Louis these days, Ethan, Mrs. Holloway scolded. Miss Davis answered our advertisement. We should be grateful. I wanted a change, Victoria said carefully. The city holds difficult memories from the war. Something in her voice must have resonated with him, for the sheriff's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Well, Miss Davis, welcome to my prison. Agnes will show you to your room. We can discuss your duties in the morning. He turned with surprising confidence, one hand trailing lightly along the wall as he disappeared back into the study. The door closed with a decisive click. Don't mind him, Mrs. Holloway whispered. He was the most respected man in 3 counties before this happened. Pride's wounded deeper than his eyes. She picked up Victoria's bag. Come along. Your room's upstairs. I've had the Wilkins girl come in to clean it properly. As Victoria followed Mrs. Holloway up the narrow staircase, she felt the weight of her deception pressed down on her shoulders. She had fled Colorado to escape hanging for a crime she didn't commit. Now she was hiding under a false name, in the home of a blind sheriff, lying about her skills, her past, her very identity. The cruel twist was that she had indeed been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Working as a hotel maid in Denver, she had walked in on the hotel owner's wife, stealing jewelry from a guest room. The woman, rather than admit her own crime, had accused Victoria instead, with the owner backing his wife's claim and Victoria's previous employer unwilling to provide a character reference after she'd rejected his advances. The case against her had been swift and merciless. She had fled the night before her sentencing, using the last of her savings to purchase a new identity and passage as far from Colorado as possible. Silver Gulch hadn't been her destination, merely the final stop on a journey driven by fear and dwindling funds. Breakfast is at 7, Mrs. Holloway was saying as she opened a door to a small but comfortable bedroom. The sheriff usually takes coffee in his study around the same time. He's been dressing himself, though not particularly well, I might add. He'll need help with correspondence, household matters, and getting about town when necessary. Victoria nodded, setting her bag on the simple bed. I understand, and his medical needs. Dr. Jenkins comes by twice weekly to check the wound in his eyes. There's a salve for the scarring that needs applying daily. Other than that, Mrs. Holloway's voice dropped. It's his spirit that needs tending more than his body, Miss Davis. That bullet took more than his sight. After Mrs. Holloway departed, promising to return the next morning to help Victoria settle in, the house fell into deep silence. Victoria unpacked her meager belongings, arranging them carefully in the worn dresser. From the bottom of her bag, wrapped in a chemise, she removed a folded newspaper, clipping her own face staring back at her beneath the bold headline. Maid robs hotel guests, flees justice. She should have burned it days ago, but some part of her needed the reminder of how quickly a life could unravel, how tenuous her safety truly was. Victoria tucked the clipping beneath the false bottom of her toiletry case, where her real identification also lay hidden. Downstairs, she heard movement, the thump of what might be a chair, a muffled curse. The sheriff, navigating his familiar home as if it were foreign territory. Victoria stood at her bedroom door, uncertain whether to offer assistance. Before she could decide, silence fell again. That night, sleep eluded her. She lay awake in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the creaks and sighs of the house settling, to the occasional footsteps from below as Sheriff Montgomery apparently roamed his home in the dark hours, when his blindness mattered less. Victoria stared at the ceiling, wondering if she had traded one prison for another. Morning arrived with pale light filtering through thin curtains. Victoria dressed carefully in her second-best dress, a serviceable gray with white collar and cuffs, and pinned her dark hair into a simple knot. The woman who looked back from the small mirror was unexceptional, forgettable, perfect. She found the kitchen easily enough, a neat space with a cast-iron stove, already radiating welcome heat. Coffee bubbled in a pot, and fresh bread sat on the counter alongside a crock of butter. A note in sprawling handwriting informed her that Mrs. Holloway had come early to start breakfast and would return after church. Victoria prepared a tray coffee, bread, a bit of preserves she found in the pantry, and approached the study door with apprehension coiling in her stomach. She knocked late. "Either come in or go away, Miss Davis. But don't hover at my door like a ghost." The sheriff's voice carried clearly through the wood. She pushed the door open to find him, seated in a leather chair by the unlit fireplace, already dressed in simple trousers and a shirt, though the buttons were misaligned. His hair was damp, as if he'd attempted to wash, and he'd made an effort to trim his beard, though the results were even. "Good morning, Sheriff Montgomery," Victoria said, keeping her voice steady. "I brought coffee and bread. Mrs. Holloway left them for breakfast. Agnes fusses too much," he replied, though his face turned toward the scent of coffee. "Been taking care of myself for 3 months now, and not very successfully, from what I can see," Victoria said, before she could stop herself. Then, mortified by her bluntness, she added hastily, "I mean your buttons, sir. They're not aligned properly." To her surprise, a short, rusty laugh escaped him. "Brutal honesty before breakfast, Miss Davis. I didn't realize that was part of your nursing training. I apologize. That was inappropriate," she said, setting the tray on a small table beside him. "No, it was refreshing." He gestured vaguely toward his shirt. "I've had 3 months of people tiptoeing around me, speaking in hushed voices, as if volume might somehow damage my useless eyes. Tell me, am I as much of a mess as I feel?" Victoria studied him openly, now that he couldn't see her scrutiny. Despite the disheveled appearance, there was strength in his frame, intelligence in his expression. The wound was visible now as a puckered scar that traced from his left temple back toward his hairline. "Your shirt needs rebuttoning. Your beard could use evening out, and your hair wants trimming," she answered honestly. "But otherwise, you seem perfectly capable, Sheriff." He smiled, then transforming his stern features. "Capable. That's generous of you, Miss Davis." His hand found the coffee cup with surprising accuracy. "So, shall we discuss what exactly you're meant to do with a capable blind man who's too stubborn to admit when he needs help?" Over the next hour, they established the parameters of Victoria's role. She would assist with correspondence, household management, reading to him from reports and newspapers, and accompanying him when he felt ready to venture into town again. The matter of personal care was addressed obliquely. He insisted he could manage dressing and bathing, though he conceded he might need assistance with details like buttons and shaving. "And what of your duties as sheriff?" Victoria asked. "Surely you can't have abandoned them entirely." His expression darkened. "My deputy, Jim Collins, handles day-to-day matters, brings me reports when necessary. The town council wants me to resign. Make it official." His hands clenched on the arms of his chair. 3 generations of Montgomerys have worn the badge in Silver Gulch. I'm not surrendering it because of one lucky shot by a 2-bit bank robber. "The woman who shot you, a man," he corrected sharply. "Roger Wade led a gang that hit banks across 3 territories. We tracked them to an abandoned mining camp north of here. He got off a shot as we closed in. The rest of the gang scattered. Wade himself is still at large." Victoria hesitated, unsure how much to press. "And there's hope that your sight might return?" Dr. Jenkins says the bullet didn't destroy the eyes themselves. "The damage is to something behind them, nerves, brain, something medical. I don't pretend to understand." His voice was matter-of-fact, belying the tragedy of his words. He's seen cases where similar injuries healed, given time, and cases where they didn't. "I see," Victoria said, then winced at her poor choice of words. The sheriff's mouth twitched. "No, Miss Davis, you do. That's rather the point of you being here." The days fell into a rhythm more comfortable than Victoria had dared hope. Each morning, she helped Sheriff Montgomery with correspondence, reading letters aloud and transcribing his replies in a careful hand. His official business had diminished since the shooting, but he still received updates from his deputy and maintained communication with law enforcement in neighboring counties. She learned to navigate his moods, the quiet, contemplative mornings when he seemed almost at peace with his condition, and the restless, frustrated afternoons when he paced his study, bumping into furniture he'd known the location of his entire life, but somehow couldn't map in his mind's eye. By the end of her first week, Victoria had organized the household accounts, established a system for managing incoming mail, and convinced the sheriff to join her for a short walk around the property. His reluctance to venture beyond the house was palpable, but his cabin fever outweighed his pride. "People will stare," he muttered, as she helped him into his coat for their first excursion. "Nothing townsfolk love more than watching the mighty fall. Then give them something worth staring at," Victoria replied, placing his hat on his head at our angle that suggested confidence rather than defeat. "Stand straight. You're still Sheriff Montgomery." He reached out unexpectedly, his fingers finding her forearm with surprising accuracy. "You're not what I expected, Margaret Davis." The use of her false name sent a jolt of guilt through Victoria. In the routine of daily care, she sometimes forgot she was living a lie. "No, what did you expect? Someone meeker, someone who'd coddle me." His fingers tightened briefly before releasing her arm. "You don't tiptoe around me or my condition. It's refreshing." Their walk was brief but significant. The sheriff held her arm lightly, his stride growing more confident as they circled the small garden behind his house. Victoria described the early summer flowers, the condition of the fence that needed mending, the distant shapes of the mountains that embraced the valley. "Your voice changes when you describe beautiful things," he observed, as they turned back toward the house. "It lifts slightly, becomes more animated." Victoria glanced at him, surprised by his perception. "I didn't realize. Perhaps I missed seeing beauty more than I knew." "What made you leave St. Louis, Miss Davis?" The question was casual, but Victoria felt her heart stutter. "You've never really said," as she swallowed. "There was nothing left for me there. After the war, after all the death I'd seen, I needed somewhere quieter, somewhere I could be useful without being reminded of loss every day." It wasn't entirely a lie. Denver had indeed been overwhelming after her simple upbringing in a Pennsylvania farming community. She had sought peace and honest work, only to find herself framed and fleeing for her life. Was all he said, but something in his tone suggested he wasn't entirely satisfied with her answer. That evening, as Victoria prepared to bring the sheriff his dinner tray, she heard voices from the study. The sheriff and his deputy engaged in what sounded like an argument. She hesitated in the hallway, not wanting to interrupt. "Can't just ignore this, Ethan," the deputy was saying, his voice tense. "3 banks hit in 2 months. Same pattern as Wade's gang. They're moving this way. Sure as sunrise. And what exactly do you expect me to do about it, Jim?" Jim's voice was tight with frustration. "Ride out and track them by the sound of their horses? No, but your experience, worth exactly nothing if I can't see what I'm tracking. You know that." A heavy silence fell. Victoria shifted uncomfortably, knowing she should announce her presence, but caught by the gravity of the conversation. "There's something else," the deputy said finally. "New wanted posters came in on yesterday's mail coach. I've been putting them up around town." Victoria's blood ran cold. "Anything interesting?" The sheriff sounded weary now, as if this ritual was merely a formality. "Usual lot of horse thieves and con men. One woman, though. Maid who robbed hotel guests in Denver. Victoria Hart, dark hair, early 20s, brown eyes." Victoria nearly dropped the tray. Her hands trembled so badly that the china teacup rattled against the saucer. The sound, slight as it was, carried in the silence. "Miss Davis, is that you?" the sheriff called. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. "Yes, sir. I brought your dinner, but I heard voices. I didn't want to interrupt." "Come in," he called. Jim was just leaving. Victoria pushed the door open with her shoulder, careful to keep her expression neutral as she entered. Deputy Collins was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 30, with sandy hair and a serious face. His eyes widened slightly as he took her in, and she felt a moment of pure terror had he studied the wanted poster closely enough to recognize her. "Miss Davis, this is Deputy Jim Collins." "Jim, my new aide, Margaret Davis." The deputy nodded politely. "Ma'am, heard you've been getting our stubborn sheriff out of the house. That's no small feat." "Small steps," Victoria replied, setting the tray on the desk. "We only made it to the garden today. Tomorrow, maybe the front porch," the sheriff added dryly. Deputy Collins smiled, but his eyes were troubled. "I'll let you eat in peace. Think about what I said, Ethan." He tipped his hat to Victoria and departed, leaving an uneasy silence in his wake. "Wade's gang," the sheriff said abruptly as Victoria arranged his dinner plate. "They're active again." She kept her hands steady with effort. The men who shot you? Think so. Same method, same targets. His unseeing eyes seem to look straight through her. Bothers you, doesn't it? Working for a lawman when there are dangerous men about. Victoria focused on pouring his tea. I nursed men through war, Sheriff. Danger isn't new to me. I know, but there's something. He tilted his head as if listening to something beyond her words. Your breathing changed when Jim mentioned the wanted posters. Heart rate too. If that slight tremor in the teacup is any indication. Victoria set the pot down with deliberate care. I don't like the idea of criminals in the area. Is that so strange? The sheriff was silent for a long moment, his face impossible to read. No, he said finally. Not strange at all. That night, Victoria barely slept. She lay awake, mentally calculating how quickly she could pack her few belongings and be on the morning stage. The wanted posters were in town now. It was only a matter of time before someone made the connection. Despite her changed hairstyle and deliberately plain clothing. Yet the thought of fleeing again exhausted her. Silver Gulch had begun to feel almost like refuge. The sheriff's home, for all its silence and shadows, had become a place where she felt useful, needed. And Sheriff Montgomery himself, she was drawn to his quiet strength, his determination to overcome his disability, even his flashes of bitter humor. She rose before dawn, decision made. She would stay, at least for now. The deputy hadn't recognized her, and who else in this remote town would study a wanted poster from Denver closely enough to identify her? Besides, she rationalized, abandoning the sheriff now would leave him vulnerable again, perhaps drive him deeper into isolation. She had a responsibility to him, false pretenses or not. The next few days passed without incident. Victoria maintained the household routine, read reports to the sheriff, and continued their daily walks, gradually extending their range to include a short stretch of the road leading to town. If the sheriff harbored suspicions about her identity, he didn't voice them. Instead, there was a new awareness between them, a tension born of unasked questions and unspoken truths. On Sunday evening, a week after Deputy Collins's visit, Victoria was reading aloud from a new novel the sheriff had ordered from back east when a sharp knock interrupted them. Before she could rise to answer it, the study door burst open to reveal Mrs. Holloway, her face flushed with excitement. Sheriff, Miss Davis, you won't believe it, she exclaimed, forgetting her usual decorum. They've caught one of Wade's gang. Jim Collins and 2 volunteers ambushed them at Willow Creek Crossing. The sheriff straightened in his chair. Wade himself, I know one of his men, Peterson, some such name. They're bringing him in now. Miss Holloway clutched her shawl tighter. Whole towns turned out to see. Help me up, Miss Davis, the sheriff commanded, already rising from his chair. And fetch my coat. Victoria hesitated. Are you certain you want to? I'm still sheriff of this county. He cut her off, his voice brooking no argument. And I've been waiting 3 months to look into the face of one of the men responsible for this. He gestured toward his scarred temple. Victoria helped him into his coat, then placed his hat carefully on his head. The streets will be crowded, she warned. Predictable. Then I'll hold your arm a little tighter, won't I? There was a grim determination in his voice that she hadn't heard before. This wasn't the bitter man she'd met upon arrival, but a glimpse of the lawman he had been, confident, resolute, uncompromising. They made their way slowly to the jailhouse, which stood near the center of town. True to Mrs. Holloway's word, it seemed the entire population of Silver Gulch had gathered in the street outside, a path cleared for them as people recognized the sheriff, whispers following in their wake. Sheriff Montgomery, good to see you out, called a man Victoria didn't recognize. About time you showed your face, Sheriff, said another. Town needs you. The sheriff nodded in the direction of the voices but kept moving, his grip on Victoria's arm almost painful in its intensity. She guided him carefully up the steps of the jailhouse and through the door into the crowded office beyond. Ethan. Deputy Collins looked up in surprise from the desk. Didn't expect to see you here. Where is he? The sheriff demanded, ignoring the greeting. Back cell, Collins replied. Names. Frank, we caught him and another man trying to scout the bank. Other one got away, but Peterson took a bullet in the leg. He's not going anywhere. Victoria hung back as the deputy led the sheriff through to the cells at the rear of the building. Her heart pounded so violently, she feared someone might hear it. A member of Wade's gang, here in Silver Gulch. Would he recognize her from Denver? Had he been among those watching as she was falsely accused, painted as a thief by a woman too powerful to challenge? Miss Davis, the sheriff's voice called her back to the present. I need you. As she moved reluctantly toward the cells, keeping her head down. In the last cell, a man sat on a narrow cot, his leg crudely bandaged. He was perhaps 40, with a weather-beaten face and cold eyes that shifted calculatingly between the lawmen. Frank Peterson, the sheriff said, his voice hard as granite. I'm Sheriff Ethan Montgomery. The prisoner sneered. I know who you are. Roger said he winged you, but didn't mention he'd blinded you. That's a nice bonus. The deputy stepped forward angrily, but the sheriff raised a hand, stopping him. Where's Wade now? Peterson laughed. You think I'd tell you that? Even if I knew? I think you're looking at hanging for armed robbery across 3 territories, the sheriff replied evenly. Cooperation might convince a judge to consider prison instead. Go to hell. Peterson spat, then his gaze shifted to Victoria. She kept her eyes lowered, praying he wouldn't recognize her. But something in her posture must have caught his attention. Well, hello there, darling. You're a sight prettier than the company I expected in this backwater. Miss Davis is my aide, the sheriff said curtly. She's here because I require her assistance. Sure she is, Peterson drawled. Mighty convenient arrangement for a blind man and a pretty girl all alone in that big house of yours. His eyes narrowed suddenly. Hold on. Don't I know you from somewhere, sweetheart? Victoria's breath caught. She raised her eyes to his, silently pleading. If he identified her now, everything would unravel. I don't believe we've met, she managed. Peterson studied her, his expression calculating. Guess not. But you do look familiar. Maybe I saw your picture somewhere. The sheriff's hand found Victoria's arm with unexpected precision. We're done here, he announced. Jim, keep a close watch on him. I want to know the moment he decides to be more cooperative. As they left the jailhouse, Victoria could feel Peterson's eyes on her back, could almost hear the wheels turning in his mind as he tried to place her face. The sheriff remained silent as they walked home, but his posture was rigid with unspoken tension. Only when they were safely inside, the door closed against the curious town. Did he speak? He recognized you. It wasn't a question. Victoria stood frozen in the hallway, her carefully constructed world teetering on the edge of collapse. I don't know what you mean. Please don't insult my intelligence, Miss Davis. Or should I say, Miss Hart? Victoria felt the blood drain from her face. How long have you known? Known? I didn't know, but I suspected something wasn't right about you from the beginning. He removed his hat, his movements precise despite his blindness. Your story had holes, small inconsistencies. The way you described St. Louis didn't match the city I visited 3 years ago. Your knowledge of nursing seemed selective. Then why didn't you say something? Victoria asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Because whatever you were hiding, you were also genuine in your care, your concern. His unseeing eyes seemed to find her despite his disability. I thought perhaps you were running from an abusive husband or some other personal trouble. I didn't imagine you were actually Victoria Hart, wanted for theft in Denver. So he had heard her name from Deputy Collins's report on the wanted posters. Victoria felt her legs weaken. She reached for the wall to steady herself. I didn't do it. She said the words tumbling out. I was framed. The hotel owner's wife was the real thief. But when I caught her, she accused me instead. No one believed a maid over her. And you expect me to believe you now? His voice was cold. The connection they had built over the past week suddenly severed. You've lied about everything since you arrived. Your name, your background, your skills. I'm not about caring for you, Victoria interrupted, surprising herself with her vehemence. That was real. All of it. She took a shaky breath. I needed somewhere to hide, somewhere no one would look for me. When I saw the advertisement for a position caring for an injured lawman in Wyoming territory, it seemed ironic, I suppose. The last place anyone would look for a fugitive. The sheriff was silent for a long moment. Victoria could read nothing in his expression, couldn't tell if he was contemplating forgiveness or planning to call for his deputy. I should arrest you, he said finally, his voice low. It's my duty. I know. Victoria didn't bother to deny it. But I'm asking you to listen first, to hear the full truth before you decide. A weary sigh escaped him. Very well, Miss Hart. You have until morning to convince me of your innocence. After that, I make my decision. Through the night, Victoria told her story, the full, unvarnished truth of her journey from a Pennsylvania farm to a Denver hotel to his doorstep in Silver Gulch. She spoke of her father's death, her mother's remarriage to a cruel man, her escape to the city in search of honest work. She described the moment she had walked in on Mrs. Crawford stealing from the hotel guests, the speed with which the accusation had been turned against her, the mockery of a trial that followed. The sheriff listened without interruption, his face impossible to read. When she finally fell silent, dawn was breaking, pale light filtering through the study windows. "You have no proof of your innocence," he said at last. "It wasn't a question." "No," Victoria admitted, "only my word, which I know means little, given how I've deceived you." The sheriff rose, moving to the window with the confidence of a man who had traversed this room countless times. "You could have left when the wanted posters arrived. When Peterson recognized you, why stay?" Victoria hesitated, uncertain if the truth would help or harm her case. "Because I couldn't bear to leave you," she said finally, her voice soft. "Because here, with you, I felt useful, needed, like the person I was meant to be before everything went wrong." He turned back toward her, his clouded eyes somehow finding her with uncomfortable accuracy. "I believe you." Victoria blinked, uncertain she had heard correctly. "You do. I've spent my life reading people, Miss Hart. Blindness hasn't entirely robbed me of that ability." He moved to his chair, lowering himself with practiced ease. "The genuine care in your voice can't be fabricated, nor can the way you've devoted yourself to this household to my recovery, when you could have simply offered the minimum care required." Tears pricked her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "Don't thank me yet," he cautioned. "Believing you and knowing what to do about it are two different matters. You're still wanted for a crime in Colorado territory. That fact doesn't change." What will you do?" The sheriff rubbed his temples wearily. "I don't know. My duty is clear, but," he sighed. "Give me time to think." Victoria nodded, then remembered he couldn't see the gesture. "Of course. One more thing," he added as she turned to leave. "I still need an aide. Whatever I decide about Victoria Hart, I hope Margaret Davis can continue her duties, at least for now." "I'll prepare your breakfast," she replied softly, understanding the temporary reprieve for what it was. The next 2 days passed in a strange limbo. On the surface, their routine continued unchanged breakfast for her. On the third morning, Deputy Collins arrived as Victoria was clearing the breakfast dishes. His expression was grim as he requested a private word with the sheriff. Victoria retreated to the kitchen, but the deputy's voice carried clearly down the hallway. "Wade's been spotted," he was saying urgently. 20 miles south of here with 3 men. They hit the bank in Carlton yesterday, killed the teller." "Killed the teller? Coming here next," the sheriff replied, certainty. "That's my guess. Peterson won't admit it, but he was clearly scouting our bank when we caught him." And now, a hesitation. "There's something else, Ethan. That aide of yours, Miss Davis, Peterson's been asking about her. Says he's certain he knows her from somewhere." Victoria's hands trembled as she stacked dishes, straining to hear the sheriff's response. "What's your point, Jim?" His tone revealed nothing. "Just seems odd is all. Her arriving right before Wade's gang resurfaces. Her familiarity with his men. Maybe you should..." "I don't know. Be careful what you say around her. Are you suggesting Miss Davis is in league with bank robbers?" The sheriff's voice held a dangerous edge. "I'm saying things aren't always what they seem," the deputy replied carefully. "And you can't see what the rest of us can." A silence fell, heavy and oppressive. Victoria closed her eyes, waiting for the accusation, the revelation, the collapse of the fragile trust the sheriff had extended. "Thank you for your concern, Jim," the sheriff said finally. "I'll keep it in mind. Now tell me your plan for when Wade comes calling." Other discussion shifted to defenses, positioning of men, the vulnerabilities of the bank building. Victoria moved away from the door, her mind racing. Wade was coming. The man who had shot the sheriff, whose gang had crossed paths with her in Denver, and Peterson was still trying to place her face. It was too dangerous to stay for her and for the sheriff. That evening, after a quiet dinner where the sheriff seemed lost in thought, Victoria retired to her room and began to pack. She worked silently, folding her few belongings into her carpet bag, leaving behind the dresses purchased with her Silver Gulch wages. She would take only what she had arrived, with no more theft accusations would follow her name. The house settled into silence as midnight approached. Victoria crept downstairs, her bag in hand, a brief note of apology clutched in her fingers. She paused at the study door, wanting one last glimpse of the man who had believed her when no one else would. The door stood slightly ajar, lamplight spilling into the dark hallway. She pushed it open silently, expecting to find it empty. Instead, the sheriff sat in his chair, facing the door as if he had been waiting for her. "Going somewhere, Miss Hart?" he asked quietly. Victoria froze. "How did you know?" "I heard you packing. My hearing has improved considerably these past months." He gestured to the chair opposite his. "Sit, please." As she hesitated, then set her bag down and took the seat. "It's better if I leave. Wade is coming, and Peterson is raising suspicions about me. I don't want to bring more trouble to your door." "A noble," the sheriff commented, "but ultimately foolish. Where will you go? How far will you get before someone recognizes you from those wanted posters? At least here, you have," he trilled. "Have what?" "A protection," he finished, though something in his tone suggested he'd been about to say something else. "I've been running for months," Victoria said softly. "I'm good at it by now. And if I asked you to stay?" The question hung in the air between them, weighted with unspoken meaning. "Why would you?" she whispered. "Because I need you," he admitted, his voice rough with emotion. "Not just as an aide, as the woman who forced me out of this study, back into the world, as the voice that describes sunsets and flowers, when I can see nothing but darkness." He leaned forward, his unseeing eyes somehow finding hers. "As the person who reminds me, there's more to a man than his sight." Victoria's heart pounded against her ribs. "Ethan, stay," he said simply. "Help me face Wade when he comes. Afterward, I'll help you clear your name. We'll go to Denver if necessary, find evidence, witnesses, whatever it takes. Or you would do that. Risk your reputation for someone you barely know." His mouth quirked in that half smile that had become so familiar. "I know you better than you think, Victoria Hart. I may not see your face, but I know your heart." Before she could respond, a shot shattered the night silence. Then another, and shouts from the direction of the town center. The sheriff was on his feet instantly, moving to his desk with unerring accuracy. He pulled open a drawer and retrieved his revolver. "Wade," he said grimly. It started. Victoria rose, her decision made in that moment of crisis. "What can I do?" "Be my eyes," he replied, checking the chambers of his gun by touch. "Help me do my job one last time." The streets were chaos as they emerged from the house. Townspeople ran for cover as shots rang out from the direction of the bank. A building was burning near the saloon, flames illuminating the night in flickering orange. "Describe everything," the sheriff commanded as Victoria guided him toward the jailhouse, where they could hear Deputy Collins shouting orders to the hastily assembled volunteers. "4 men on horseback in front of the bank," Victoria reported, keeping her voice steady with effort. "One standing guard while the others go inside. The guard has a rifle. The fire is at Miller's feed store, spreading fast. Townspeople are running for the water pump." They reached the jailhouse just as Deputy Collins emerged with a shotgun. "Ethan, Miss Davis, you need to get inside. Wade himself is leading them." "How many men have you got?" the sheriff asked, ignoring the warning. 5 volunteers with rifles, positioned in the hotel and general store. But Wade's men set that fire as a distraction. Half the town's trying to put it out instead of fighting. The sheriff's face settled into determined lines. "Get Victoria inside, Jim. Then coordinate the men. Don't let them reach the horses when they come out of the bank." "And you?" the deputy demanded. "I have business with Roger Wade," he replied grimly. "Victoria, which one is he?" She scanned the scene, heart racing. "Tall man in a black duster, just coming out of the bank now. He's carrying saddlebags, likely filled with money. Has a revolver in his right hand." Before anyone could stop him, the sheriff stepped into the street, his gun held steadily before him. "Wade," he shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. Roger Wade, of the tall outlaw world peering through the smoke and shadows. His face registered shock, then amusement as he recognized the blind sheriff. "Well, I'll be damned," he called back. "Montgomery, thought you'd be long buried by now." "Drop your weapon and surrender," the sheriff commanded, as if he were facing the man with his full faculties intact. "You're surrounded." Wade laughed, the sound cruel in the fire-lit street. "A blind man and a few shopkeepers? I don't think so." He raised his gun. "Time to finish what I started, Sheriff." A left shoulder, moving right, Victoria cried as Wade adjusted his aim. The sheriff fired instantly, the shot missing Wade by inches but forcing him to dive for cover behind a water trough. Gunfire erupted from multiple directions. The volunteers in the hotel window opened fire on Wade's men, who scattered for cover, abandoning their loot. Wade himself rose to return fire at the sheriff, who stood exposed in the center of the street. 3 o'clock firing, Victoria called, and the sheriff adjusted his aim, firing twice in rapid succession. One bullet struck the water trough, but the second caught Wade in the arm, spinning him sideways. "You got him," Victoria exclaimed, but her triumph was short-lived. One of Wade's men had circled behind them, emerging from an alley with his gun trained on the sheriff's back. Without thinking, Victoria lunged, shoving the sheriff aside as the outlaw fired. Pain exploded in her shoulder, as the bullet meant for Ethan Montgomery tore through her flesh instead. She crumpled to the ground, vaguely aware of the deputy's shotgun roaring in response, of the sheriff calling her name, of hands lifting her from the dirt of Main Street. Consciousness came and went in waves. The doctor's grave faces extracted the bullet. The sheriff's hand gripping hers, his unseeing eyes fixed on her face, as if through sheer will, he could pierce the darkness that separated them. Mrs. Holloway's tutting as she changed bandages, her earlier suspicions apparently forgotten in the face of Victoria's sacrifice. When she finally woke fully, sunlight was streaming through unfamiliar curtains. She lay not in her small bedroom at the sheriff's house, but in a larger bed, in a room she recognized as the sheriff's own. Her shoulder was heavily bandaged, and moving sent slivers of pain shooting down her arm. "You're awake." The sheriff's voice came from beside the bed, where he sat in a straight-back chair. He looked exhausted, his face shadowed with stubble, his clothes rumpled as if he'd worn them for days. "Wade," Victoria managed, her throat dry. "Captured, along with 2 of his men, 1 dead." The sheriff leaned forward. "Thanks to you. You saved my life." Does he recognize me?" He knows exactly who you are," the sheriff replied gently. "Or rather, who you aren't. It seems Mrs. Crawford's thefts weren't limited to the hotel guests in Denver. She'd been stealing from the hotel safe as well. Money Wade's gang had stored there after a previous robbery." Victoria struggled to process this information. "So Wade knew she was the real thief?" "He did, and he's willing to testify to that effect in exchange for consideration in his sentencing." The sheriff's mouth curved in a grim smile. "He's a murderer and a thief. But apparently he draws the line at seeing an innocent woman hanged for someone else's crime." A relief washed over Victoria, so profound it left her trembling. "Then it's over. I'm free." Not quite yet. There's still legal work to be done, testimonies to be taken. "I've wired the authorities in Denver," explained the situation. "They're sending someone to interview Wade." He reached for her hand, finding it with surprising accuracy. "But yes, Victoria, soon you'll be free." His fingers were warm around hers, strong and steady. In that touch was not just the promise of freedom, but of something she had stopped believing in months ago, a future, a home, the possibility of heaven. "And then what?" she whispered, hardly daring to voice the question aloud. The sheriff's thumb traced gentle circles on the back of her hand. "Then," he said softly, "you decide. You could go anywhere, be anyone. Or," he hesitated, vulnerability visible in the set of his shoulders, "or you could stay here with me." "As your aide?" Victoria asked, needing to be certain of his meaning. His clouded eyes found hers with uncanny precision. "As whatever you wish to be. My aide, my companion, he swallowed, "my wife in time, if that's what you want." Victoria's heart seemed to stop and restart with renewed purpose. This man had believed her when others had condemned her, had fought for her freedom, had seen her true self when his eyes could see nothing at all. "Yes," she said simply, squeezing his hand. "That's what I want." A tentative smile transformed his features, making him look younger, unburdened. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her fingers. Then it settled. Outside, Silver Gulch was beginning to rebuild after Wade's raid. Townspeople repaired damaged buildings, swept away broken glass, restored order from chaos. Inside the sheriff's bedroom, a different kind of restoration was taking place. 2 wounded souls, finding in each other the healing they both desperately needed. 6 months later, as autumn painted the surrounding hills in gold and crimson, Sheriff Ethan Montgomery stood on the porch of the house that was now both office and home. Beside him, Victoria Montgomery described the sunset in quiet detail. her words painting pictures his eyes could not see. Beautiful, he murmured when she finished, though his face was turned not toward the horizon, but to her. His hand found hers with the ease of long practice, fingers intertwining. "Sheriff, Mrs. Montgomery," Deputy Collins called, riding up to the house with a letter in hand. "News from Denver. Thought you'd want to see it right away." Victoria took the envelope, breaking the official seal. She scanned the contents, then read aloud for her husband's benefit. "To Sheriff and Mrs. Ethan Montgomery, Silver Gulch, Wyoming Territory. This letter serves as official notification that all charges against Victoria Hart have been dismissed, following the confession and testimony of Mrs. Eleanor Crawford." Ethan's arm slipped around her waist, strong and steady. "It's over," he said quietly. "Truly over now. Thank you, Jim," Victoria managed, wiping away tears of relief. The deputy tipped his hat and rode back toward town, leaving them alone with the fading day and the news that had closed the final chapter of her past. Later, as they sat before the fire in the study that had been the setting for so many turning points in their relationship, Ethan took her hand. "You're officially Victoria Montgomery now," he said. "No more hiding, no more running, no more lies," she agreed, resting her head against his shoulder. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket. He pressed a small object into her palm, a silver star, identical to the one he still wore. "I had it made in town. You earned it as much as I ever did." Victoria traced the points of the star with her fingertip. "I'm not a deputy." No, he agreed with a smile. "You're something far more important. You're the eyes of the law in Silver Gulch. My eyes." As darkness gathered outside, Victoria pinned the star to her dress, its weight unfamiliar but right. Like the truth, like justice, like love. It had been worth waiting for, worth fighting for, worth finding in the most unexpected of places with a blind sheriff who saw her more clearly than anyone ever had before.